Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Inshallah, we will begin this week's lesson number 13, by starting the chapter which deals with or which concerns women's period blood and with regards to bleeding after childbirth. Now, the Arabic word which is used to describe period blood is called hayd, and the Arabic word which is used to describe postnatal bleeding, i.e. the bleeding which a woman sees or experiences after childbirth, is called nifas. Now, before we elaborate on these two topics in a bit more detail, with regards to obligations or with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, there are two states of an individual. There are two halat of an individual. The first halat or the first state is a state before puberty and before maturity. And the second stage starts after you reach the age of puberty, after you mature, after you become baligh. That's when the second stage, when the second halat starts. Now in Islam, the age or a child before puberty or before maturity is not considered liable for his actions. Nothing is compulsory or obligatory upon him. Namaz, say for example, isn't compulsory for a child. Fasting, roza isn't compulsory for a child. Going for hajj isn't compulsory for a child. However, if a child does read namaz, and there are many hadiths, and we will look at these hadiths under the Salah and Namaz section, that at the age of 7 you should encourage your child to read Salah, and then at the age of 10, then you can punish him if he doesn't read his Namaz. But in terms of obligations before the age of puberty, before maturity, a child isn't obliged to read Namaz, he's not even obliged to fast. Again, out of practice and to get his experience and mashq, if you want to teach him to fast, if you tell him to fast, that's different. But in terms of obligation, before maturity, before bulugh, nothing is obligatory upon him. Even if a child goes for hajj, then that hajj isn't accepted in terms of his obligatory hajj. So therefore, after maturity and after bulugh, that child will have to redo his hajj again. So that is the first stage. And then the second stage, which starts after the child reaches the age of puberty, then that's when a person or a child cannot use his childhood to be an excuse anymore. If he doesn't read namaz, you can't say, oh, he's only a child. If a child, say for example, someone who's just reached the age of puberty and he goes and vandalizes things, he goes and starts breaking things, he goes and starts abusing people, you can't then say, oh, well, he's a child then. Because as soon as the child reaches the age of puberty and bulugh, that's when he is liable for his actions. And as we're going to look at later, even to the extent that if he was to damage things, then he'll have to give compensation for that. Because when a child reaches the age of puberty and bulugh, he's now responsible for his actions. He's like every man is for himself, so he will have to now, live by the decisions he makes. He will have to face the consequences if he does anything out of line. Now, this is a very important state. Now, the question rises is that when does a child become mature, or when does a child reach the age of maturity or becomes baligh or reaches the age of puberty? Now for a boy, there are three signs. The first sign for a boy to reach the age of maturity and bulugh is, number one, is that if he has a wet dream. If he has a wet dream, if he has ihtilam, then that is a sign of him reaching the age of puberty. So that varies. It could be like at the age of 10 he has a wet dream. It could be at the age of 11, 12, 13, whenever. But as soon as he has a wet dream, then he is now considered mature and baligh and responsible for his actions. Namaz, roza, everything becomes compulsory and first. The second sign for a boy to reach the age of puberty, or the second sign for, you can say that he has now matured and reached the age of puberty, is if he makes a girl pregnant. If he makes a girl pregnant. And sometimes we hear all these cases of like teenage pregnancies, and the boy happens to be like a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, and he has intercourse with the girl, and the next thing the girl's pregnant. So if the guy or the boy at the age of 10 can make someone pregnant, then that is a sign that this boy has reached the age of puberty. So if he could make someone pregnant, then that is a sign that he's reached the age of puberty and maturity. Namaz, everything becomes compulsory and first. And the third alamat, and the third sign in the absence of the aforementioned two, is at the age of 15. The Muftabi code in the Hanafi fiqh is that at the age of 15, the boy is considered baligh. So just say up to the age of 15, he hasn't had a wet dream. He hasn't done anything naughty where, for example, he's made a girl pregnant. So at the age of 15, we will assume that boy to be baligh and mature. So from the age of 15, even though no wet dream, nothing, even though no kind of semen, whatever, it doesn't matter. At the age of 15, we will consider him to be baligh and mature, and from the age of 15, he is now responsible for his actions. So these are the three things for a boy. For a girl, there's four things for a girl to reach the age of puberty. Number one is, what I've mentioned, is if she falls pregnant. So if a girl falls pregnant at the age of 11, 12, we hear these teenage pregnancies, so that is a sign that this girl is pregnant. So this girl is mature and baligh. Number two, the second sign is if the girl has a wet dream. And you may be thinking, can women have wet dreams? The answer is yes, they can. Obviously, they don't have it as frequent and as often as men do, but women can also have wet dreams. So if a woman has a wet dream, or if a girl has a wet dream, then that is a sign that she has reached the age of puberty. The third sign is she has haze or she has period blood. And that's the section which we're going to start in the next few minutes or so, is that if a girl starts seeing period blood, starts seeing menses, then that is a sign that she has reached the age of puberty and she is baligh and mature. And the fourth sign in the absence of the aforementioned three is at the age of 15. Like with the boy, at the age of 15, that girl will be considered mature and baligh. Now the signs which I've mentioned, it's only through these signs we can determine someone to be mature and someone to be baligh. Now from this, the fuqaha, the jurists have said that if a boy, say for example, starts growing hair on his face, on his cheeks, or he starts getting hair below his navel or on his armpit, that is not a sign of maturity, that is not a sign of puberty. Even though they may say in school, or that's a sign that you are matured, but Islamically that is not a sign of puberty. Growing hair, even though you may have a full beard at the age of 12, 13, but if you haven't had a wet dream, if you haven't made anyone pregnant and so on, then you're not considered, technically speaking, to be mature and baligh yet. And the same also applies for a girl as well, that if she grows hair below her navel or on her armpit, even to the extent that if the girl develops breasts, that is not a sign of puberty. If the girl develops breasts and so on, that is not a sign that she's matured yet. unless there's period blood, unless she has a wet dream, unless she falls pregnant, or in the absence of these three at the age of 50. So these are very important signs. Obviously, parents in particular, they make this mistake and they say that, oh, well, he's got a bit of hair, he's mature, and, they start obliging things on him. And then if he doesn't do it, then they start shouting at him, scolding him. But the real true fact is that that thing which you are making that boy or that girl do is not obliged to do yet. So, these are like signs which we should as parents know, like when our children reach the age of puberty and when they don't. Now going back to this particular section, Babul Hay, there's 4 Arabic words here which we need to look at in a bit more detail. Obviously, I'm going to firstly mention just briefly the concept of these 4 Arabic words, but the ruling I'm going to mention a bit more later. Now, the 4 Arabic words which we're going to look at in this particular section is number 1, hay. Number 2 is nifas. Number 3 is istihaza. And number 4 is tuhur. Now, brief explanation for each of these terminologies. On number 1, the hay basically means period blood. Nifas, as we have kind of already explained, means bleeding, postnatal bleeding after a woman gives birth to a child. The blood she sees, that is called nifas. Number 3, the third word here is istihaza, and that is surplus blood. I.e., any bleeding a woman sees after her habit or after the maximum period of haid, after the maximum period of nifas, any kind of bleeding she sees here and there, then that is called istihaza. Okay, remember the relevant rulings we're going to look at in a bit more detail in the actual section. And the 4th word here is the word tuhur. Now, tuhur literally means cleanliness. And that is also a very important factor when it comes to determining whether a girl is in a period or whether she is tuhur or whether she is clean. Now, beginning with the first section, hay. In the Hanafi fiqh, the ruling is that the minimum period of a hay or a minimum period that a woman will be in her menses is for 3 days. And the maximum is 10 days. So the minimum period is 3 days, and the maximum a woman can be in her period for is 10 days. And this is substantiated from a hadith which can be found in Sunan Daraqutni, in Sunan Darmi, in Sunan Bayhaqi, and in Imam Tabrani's Mu'jam, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that the shortest amount or the minimum amount of haid is 3 days and the maximum is 10 days. So that is the Hanafi opinion here, that 3 days is the minimum and the maximum is 10 days. Now, moving a bit further, let me just explain some rulings here with regards to a woman who's in a period. Now, a woman who's in a period or who experiences periods and menses, according to the jurists, they are split up into 3 categories. So according to the jurists, a woman who experiences haid or periods, there are 3 types of them. The first one is called a mubtadi'ah. And mubtadi'ah from the word ibtida means beginning. So which basically means that this girl thus far has not experienced any periods or any menses or haid, then all of a sudden she starts seeing blood. So obviously there are different rulings for her. Because obviously how long is she going to be in a period for? How would she determine what her habit is and so on? There's different rulings for her which I'm going to look at in a while. The second state of a woman is called a mu'tada. And mu'tada basically means a woman who's already got a previous habit. And for most of the women, they will fall under that category because a girl or a woman knows how many days per month she's in a period for. So it could be like 6 days, 7 days. She knows, the women, they know that 6 days at the beginning of the month, or 6 days in the middle, or 6 days at the end of the month. They know that they are on their period. So you call them mu'tada. And the third type of woman, or the third state of a woman, is a woman who is a mutahayyara. And mutahayyara, which is very complex, but it basically means a woman who has forgotten her habit, how long she bleeds for. Whether it's 6 days, 7 days, or when does she bleed? Is it at the beginning of the month, in the middle, or at the end? You call them a mutahayyara. But we're not going to actually go into detail regarding mutahayyara because it's very, very complex. It's something which obviously for students who are in higher classes or studying in madrasas or Islamic schools is for them. But we're just going to look at the first two in a bit more detail. The first one is called mubtadi'ah. Now remember, this is a girl, young girl, 10, 11, 12, say for example. She hasn't had periods, but all of a sudden, one morning she wakes up and she sees some blood in her underwear. Now the question is that how long will her periods be for? Now, how long does she refrain from namaz? How long, if it happens to be the month of Ramadan, how long would she refrain from fasting? How long would she is not allowed to touch the Quran or read the Quran, and so on and so forth. Now, the answer is that what you will do, or what the girl will do, is that from the day or from the moment she sees the blood up to her last bleeding. Now remember, when a girl is in a period, she doesn't bleed every day 24/7. Because if she was to, then she'll probably die. What happens is that every day she will bleed, but she will only bleed a bit, like a few drops here and there. So, just say for example, the 1st of January, this girl, she wakes up and she sees some blood in her underwear. Now, this bleeding continues for say 6 days. And then on the 7th day it stops. So what will happen is that her habit now will be 6 days. Because this is the very first time she started bleeding, and the bleeding lasted for 6 days, and then from the 7th day it stopped. 8th day it stopped, there's no bleeding, and she became stark and pure. So now the ruling is that for this girl, her habit will now be 6 days every month. So the next month, i.e. the month of February, her habit will be 6 days. That 6 days will be her period where during those 6 days she will not read namaz, she will not fast, she will not read Quran, she will not touch the Quran. And then after the 6 days, she will start reading namaz again, she will start fasting, she will start reciting the Quran, and so on and so forth. So that will be her habit. Now, there may be some girls, when they are experiencing haze and menses for the very first time, they actually bleed more than 10 days. That, they just keep on bleeding for 12 to 13 days. Whereas, as I mentioned before, that the maximum period of haze and menses is 10 days. So you've got this little girl here who is kind of bleeding for 12 and 13 days. So what will be the ruling with regards to her? So the ruling with regards to her will be, is that 10 days will be considered as haze and periods and menses, and the extra 2-3 days she was bleeding for will be considered as istihada. And we're going to look at it later on that if a girl is experiencing istihada or any kind of surplus bleeding, then even though she may be bleeding, she is still obliged to read namaz. So she will carry on reading namaz. She will have to make sure that she reads the salah, or she times the salah where there's no bleeding and so on. And if she can't do that, then there's the ruling with regards to ma'azur, which we're going to look at probably next week's lesson or the week after. So that is the masla with regards to mubtadi'ah, when she's starting a period for the very first time. And another kind of advice I'll give with regards to this particular section is that a girl naturally knows when her bleeding has stopped. So some of you may be thinking that, okay, she stopped bleeding on the 6th day. How do I know, or how would she know that there's going to be no bleeding on the 7th or on the 8th? It could be so that what may have happened was that she stopped bleeding on the 6th day, so she gave one extra day, 7th day, just to be on the safe side. But how does she know that, the bleeding may not come back on the 8th day? So as I said, the advice is that a girl naturally knows when her bleeding has stopped. So on the 6th day, she kind of gets content in her heart that, yeah, probably the bleeding has stopped. So therefore, on the 7th day, she should start reading namaz. Now obviously, if she did start reading namaz and if the blood did come, then obviously that namaz which she had read will be considered invalid, not first upon her anyway. But if she, just say for example, the bleeding stopped on the 6th day, and she said to herself, okay, let me just give you an extra day to make sure there's no bleeding. So on the 7th, she doesn't read any namaz at all. And then the 8th, she starts reading namaz. Then, the namazes which she missed on the 7th day, either 5 namazes and the witr, she will have to do qaza for all of them. Okay, so it's best that as soon as the bleeding stops, to save herself from, doing qaza for prayers, ASAP, she starts reading the salah. But, and obviously, if any blood does come, then, what she read will be invalid anyway, so she doesn't kind of lose out. And if no blood comes, then obviously it's even better. She doesn't have to do qaza of it later on. So that is with regards to a muqtadiya. The next section here is with regards to a mu'tada, and this is where, many of the sisters probably be listening on the website later on. This particular situation will apply to them. Now, a mu'tada, as I've already explained, basically means a girl who's already, or a woman who's already got a habit. Okay, so every month she knows that she bleeds for 6 days, or she bleeds for 7 days per month, or 8 days, depending, it doesn't matter, she knows. So for her it's very simple, and that is that every month for 6 days or 7 days, whatever her adat, whatever her habit is, she will refrain from namaz, she will refrain from fasting, she will refrain from touching the Quran, she will refrain from entering the masjid, and so on and so forth. And then as soon as the period finishes, then she will start her namaz, she will start fasting, she will read namaz, she will read the Quran. If she wants to come to the masjid, then she can come to the masjid. There's nothing wrong with that. Now there's a couple of rulings which we need to look at here. There's a girl or there's a woman, and she's already got her set habit of bleeding for 6 months every month. For 6 days every month. Now what happens, just say for example, January, the first 6 days, she was bleeding for menses, so she stopped reading namaz and so on. Now then what happens the following month, i.e. the month of February, this woman, instead of bleeding for 6 days, she bled more than 6 days, but less than 10 days. Basically more than her habit, which was 6 days, but less than the 10 days, which is the maximum period of haid and period bleeding. So just for argument's sake, the month of February, she was bleeding for 9 days. Now what will now happen is that if a woman, if she bleeds more than a habit, but stops before her maximum period of haid and menses, the following month after, her habit will now change from 6 days to 9 days. So from the month of March, her new habit will be 9 days. Not 6 days, but it will be now 9 days. Because in February what happened was that she bled extra 3 days up to 9 days. So 9 days will be her new habit for the month of March, for April, for May, and so on and so forth. So that is the ruling. If, for example, if a woman, if she bleeds more than a habit for less than the 10 days, then her new habit has now been formed. The previous habit will let go of that, and the new bleeding, which was a new habit, will now be applicable for the following month. And the same also applies for if a woman who's got a set habit, but she bleeds less than a set habit, but more than the minimum days of haid, or the minimum days of period. So again, same example we will use again. A woman, she's got 6 days, that's her menses, that's her period. But for the month of February, she bleeds, say, for 4 days. So less than a habit, but more than the minimum period of haid and menses, which was 3 days, but she bleeds for 4 days. So what's now going to happen is that for the month of March, her new habit will be 4 days. Not 6 days, but it will now be 4 days, and this is how you kind of rotate it. For example, 1 month the habit increases or decreases, then the next month you will act upon what you experienced in the previous month, and this is how you will go about it. However, if a woman, say for example, she bleeds more than a habit, but at the same time more than the maximum period of haid and menses. So in that situation, what will happen is that her adat and her habit will remain the same. So just say for example that this woman, her habit was to bleed for 6 days every month. But what happened, say, for the month of January was that she bled for 13 days. More than a habit, but at the same time also more than the maximum period of haid and menses. So she bled for 13 days. Now in that situation, what will happen is that her adat and her habit will remain the same. And that is, 6 days will be her haid, and the extra 7 days we will consider that to be istihaza and surplus blood. So if this woman hadn't been reading namaz during those 7 days, she will have to do qaza of those 7 days prayers and 7 days namaz. So that is a ruling there. And also the same also applies for if a girl who's got a set habit, but she bleeds less than 3 days, the minimum period of haid, then in that situation that will just be considered as istihaza, and her habit will not alter and will not change. So that is the ruling with regards to a mu'tada, someone who has got a habit already. Now just a few other things connected to muqtadiya and a mu'tada, and that is that sometimes there may be some women who don't have periods at all. Or they may have periods, but it's like once a year. Let's say, for example, like the first 5 days of January, they're in the period, and the next 12 months there's nothing, no bleeding at all. Now, what do we do with regards to those women? So the answer is simple, and that is that remember, for tuhur, for cleanliness, there is no maximum period for that. Unlike for menses, a woman can be on her period for 10 days. But for tuhur and for cleanliness, there is no maximum period. So if a woman, say for example, is clean for years, for 1 or 2 years, she doesn't see any period bleeding at all, then she is considered tahira. She is considered pure and pak, and she will have to read her salah and she will have to read her prayers all the time. Then sometimes you may get another case where you get a girl or a woman who's always in a period. Or sorry, not always in a period, but always bleeding. You get two extremes. Sometimes you get women who are never on their period, so you will consider them to be pure all the time. But sometimes you will get some women, every day they are bleeding. So with regard to them, it's a bit complex, but with regard to them, the thumb rule is that 10 days of the month, we will consider that to be haid and period, and the remaining 20 days will be considered as istihaza and surplus blood. Because obviously a woman can't be on her period for the whole year, because the maximum is like 10 days per month. So in that situation, the 10 days at the beginning of the month or in the middle, depends when her normal habit was, she will be considered to be in period, and the remaining 20 days of the month or 21 days depending, then that would be considered as istihaza and surplus blood. Another ruling, just one last ruling here with regards to tuhur in particular, is that it is mentioned in a hadith which can be found in Sunan Bayhaqi, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that two menstruation periods cannot occur within 15 days of each other. I.e., the minimum period of tuhur and cleanliness between one menstruation period and the other is 15 days. Okay, so I'll give you an example to explain this rule. Just say, for example, a woman, her adat or her period is 7 days. 7 days at the beginning of every month, she's on a period. So just say January the 1st to January the 7th, she's on a period. Now, this woman, on January the 20th, she sees blood. So it's basically 13 days since the last menstruation cycle, she sees blood on January the 20th. Now, because the hadith is clear, and that is that there has to be a minimum from one period, one menstruation cycle to another, there has to be a minimum of 15 days. But this girl, she sees bleeding after 13 days. So therefore, that bleeding she sees would not be haid, would not be periods or menses, but instead it will be istihada. It will be surplus blood, and which obviously, as we're going to look at later, does not restrict her, does not prevent her from reading salah, does not prevent her from fasting, does not prevent her from coming to the masjid or touching the Quran. So that's the main golden usul here. Okay, obviously, just say if a girl, even though her period is generally speaking, say, was at the beginning of the month, but just say for that particular month, she had a period for the first 7 days of January, and then on January the 23rd, or even January the 22nd, she sees bleeding. So because there was at least 15 days gap between her last menstruation cycle and this bleeding here, so therefore if she was to bleed for another 3 days and so on, and up to her habit, then that will also be considered as periods as well. So just remember that particular principle. And remember, this principle also applies between nifas, between childbirth bleeding, and also haze as well. We're going to look at that in a bit more detail later. But the maximum period a woman can bleed for after she gives birth to a child is 40 days in the Hanafi fiqh. 40 days. So just as an example, she's bled for 40 days after giving birth to a child. She's bled for 40 days. And then on the 50th day, she sees blood. So that blood she sees on the 50th day would not be considered as haze. But instead there has to be a 15-day gap, i.e. on the 55th day, after giving birth, if she sees blood, then we can start counting that to be her menses has started again after giving birth, and then the cycle has started. But if she was to see anything before 15 days, then that would not be considered as haze. So that's a very important principle, and that is that between two menstruation cycles, or between one childbirth, bleeding, nifas, and one menstruation cycle, there has to be a minimum gap of 15 days where she will be considered clean. Any bleeding she sees will be considered surplus blood, and it would not be considered haze or nifas, which is preventing her from reading salah or fasting or any other kind of ibadat which require taharat and cleanliness. Just going to very briefly look at the text here. Imam Quduri rahmatullahi says, أَقَلُّ الْحَيْضِ ثَلَاثَةُ أَيَّامٍ وَلَيَالِيهَا. That the minimum period of haze and period is 3 days and 3 nights. فَمَا نَقَصَ مِنْ ذَلِكَ فَلَيْسَ بِحَيْضٍ وَهُوَ إِسْتِحَاضَةٌ. And he goes on to say that any bleeding less than 3 days or less than that is not haze, is not menses, but instead it is istihada. It is kind of surplus bleeding. وَأَكْثَرُهُ عَشْرَةُ أَيَّامٍ وَمَا زَادَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ فَهُوَ استihadatu. And then Imam Quduri then goes on to say that the maximum period of menses is 10 days, and anything extra or surplus than that is considered as istihada. doesn't prevent her from salah, doesn't prevent her from any kind of ibadah. وَمَا تَرَاهُ الْمَرْأَةُ مِنَ الْحُمْرَى وَالصُّفْرَى وَالْقُدْرَى فِي أَيَّامِ الْحَيْضِ فَهُوَ حَيْضٌ حَتَّى تَرَى الْبَيَاضَ خَالِصًا. And the next text, the author, we're not going to go into depth here, but he just talks about the color. What are the colors of menses? What's the colors of periods? Because sometimes a good way to differentiate, or a good way to know whether a woman is on a period or not, is that if she was to see certain colors of bleeding or blood, then that will be considered as she is in her menses, and it is not istihada, it is not something else. And they give you some examples, such as if she was to see a red color blood, or a kind of yellowish color, or even a kind of brownish color. Sometimes women, they can see yellow color, kind of, well, you won't call it blood, but it's like a liquid or a fluid or a kind of brownish color fluid coming from the womb, then that is a sign that it is haid and it is menses. Now the next text he also mentioned that haid yusqitu anil ha'id as-salah, that haid or period blood forgives from a ha'id salah, meaning that a woman who's in a period, during her days of period, whether it's 6 days, 7 days, whatever her adat and her habit is, her salah and her namaz are forgiven on her. And they use the word here, yusqit, indicating that even after she becomes pure and pure, she doesn't have to do qaza of her prayer. Okay? Because obviously when you look at it, there are like 5 prayers every day, and in the Hanafi fiqh we say that witr is wajib, so there's like 6 prayers. So if a woman is going to be on a period, say for like, say 10 days maximum every month, so that is like 60 namazis. Every month she will have to do qaza. And it's going to be difficult for her. She won't be able to keep up. So therefore the ruling when it comes to salah is that a ha'id, a woman who's in a period, after she becomes pak and pure from a period, the salah or the prayers which she missed due to her menses, she will not have to do qaza of them afterwards. They totally become forgiven, they totally become ma. And then he goes on to say, it is also unlawful and haram for her to fast. So for a woman who's in a menses, and remember by the way, this also applies for women who are also experiencing nifas and childbirth bleeding, that it is haram for them to observe roza and to observe fasting. So in the state of menses, they are not allowed to fast. If a woman is in nifas, she's not allowed to fast. However, وَتَقْضِي الصَّوْمَ وَلَا تَقْضِي الصَّلَاةِ, she will do qaza of her fast, but she will not do qaza of her prayer. Because remember, month of Ramadan comes once in a year. So even if she was to miss, say, 10 days maximum fasting, then, she's got 11 months afterwards to do qaza before the next Ramadan comes. So, she's got plenty of time. So therefore, the fast which she has missed because of her menses or because of childbirth bleeding, she will have to do qaza of that, but there is no qaza for the prayer. The next ibarat then goes on to say, وَلَا تَدْخُلُ الْمَسْجِدِ, that a ha'id or a woman who is in a menses, she will not enter the masjid. So a woman who is in a menses on a period, or a woman who is experiencing childbirth, bleeding, nifas, she's not allowed to enter the masjid, she's not allowed to enter the mosque area. Now when I mean by mosque area, I don't mean the building here. Okay, I'll actually elaborate on this topic when we start Kitab al-Salah. When we say the word masjid, it's actually very loosely used. People think masjid should be the actual building itself. But in fiqh terminology, when we say the masjid, we mean the Jamaat khana, or we mean the Jamaat area, this place here, where the actual place where the prayer is being observed. Or to be more precise, that area which has been prescribed for iqamah li zikrillah, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's remembrance, i.e. that place which has been erected for namaz. So generally speaking, tends to be the Jamaat khana, i.e. the mosque area. So just say if a woman who's in a menses, she was to enter this masjid, but she was to go, say, in the wuzu area, or where the shoe racks are, she can enter that because that's not part of the masjid. But But where she can't enter is this particular area here. I want to look at it in more detail, in particular with regards to the question whether women can, in the first place, can they enter the masjid or not? That's a different topic which we will look at later. And another ruling here, he mentioned, وَلَا تَطُوفُ بِالْبَيْتِ, that she should not do tawaf of the Baytullah. So again, this has got to do with the Hajj Masla, Hajj ruling, that a woman who's in a menses, they can't do tawaf around the Baytullah. Those who have been for Hajj or will know that one of the fara'id, one of the obligatory acts of Hajj is that you do tawaf al-ziyarah, which you do on the 10th of Zulhijjah, where you do tawaf around the Baytullah 7 times. Now, if a woman is in a menses, she's not allowed to do tawaf. And the reason why is because tawaf is taking place in Masjid al-Haram. It is a masjid, it is a mosque. So therefore, as we looked at, because a woman who's in a menses cannot enter the masjid, so therefore she will not be allowed to enter the Masjid al-Haram to perform the tawaf. And the next ruling, وَلَا يَأْتِيهَا زَوْجُهَا, the husband cannot have sexual intercourse with her. And if you remember, we looked at this particular section in a bit more detail when we were looking at the intimate side of sexual intercourse and so on. And I did mention it there in passing that a husband cannot have sexual intercourse with his wife during her menses. Why? Because Allah has said, قُلْ هُوَ أَذَنْ فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ. Because period blood or menses is considered as a pollution, is considered as impure. So therefore Allah is telling us, is ordering us to refrain from having sexual intercourse with our wives during their period. Now, the question or the masla which we need to look at here, which I did not mention before, and that is that what can a husband do during that time? Just as an example, if he wants to kiss his wife, can he do that? If he wants to touch her, can he do that? And so on. Now the ruling is that if his wife is on menses or period, he can kiss her, he can touch her, he can even sleep with her. Not like sexual intercourse, but he can even sleep with her. He is also allowed to do something which is known as istimta. He can even derive sexual pleasure from her. Now, how can he do that? Now, there's two ways to look at this ruling. The first way is the area below, the area above his wife's belly button and below her knee. So the area above his wife's belly button and the area below her knee. Now, with regards to that particular area, talking about this is menses when she's in a period, those two areas, a husband is allowed to have direct skin-to-skin contact. So if he wants, he can touch his wife's breast, he can kiss his wife's breast during the haze, during the menses, there's nothing wrong with that, and, that isn't considered haram. Okay, direct skin-to-skin contact. And I did mention before, even to the extent that if he wants to rub his penis on that particular area, then he'll be able to do that as well. Then the second area here is the area between his wife's belly button and up to and including the knee. Now regarding that area, it is unlawful and haram for him to have direct skin-to-skin contact. So basically he can't even touch that area with his hand. Okay, he can't kiss that area with without any kind of protection there. However, if there is some kind of barrier there, i.e. if his wife's got a towel, say, on top of that particular area, or some other kind of covering where the warmth of that particular area cannot be felt by the husband, then he can derive sexual pleasure from that particular area as long as it is covered. So what I'm trying to say is that area, indirect contact is permissible, but not direct contact. And what I mean by indirect contact here is that on top of that cloth, if he wants, he can kiss his wife, that part. If he wants to rub his penis on that particular area, that will also be allowed as well. So remember, indirect contact is allowed in between that area, but direct skin-to-skin contact, that would not be allowed, and that would be haram. And the proof or the evidence for that can be found in the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, narrated by Sayyidah Aisha Anha, that she actually explained when she would be on a period, how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would derive pleasure. So it's got the word that she will put on an izar. Izar meaning that there will be a cover, a kind of sheet or a covering, covering that particular area, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would derive benefit from that particular area. So that is a masla here. وَلَا يَأْتِيهَا زَوْجُهَا, that the husband, he cannot have direct intercourse with her, but to derive pleasure in that particular way, that would be jaiz and that would be permissible. So we will just leave it here for this week. Obviously next week we will be looking at whether a haid, a woman who's in a menses, or someone who's not in the state of wudu, can they touch the Quran, can they recite the Holy Quran in that particular state. So it's a topic which needs a lot of clarifying. So inshallah we will look at that in next week's lesson. And that's when we'll see. So if someone was being said, wa akhir da'wan, alhamdulillah rabbil alamin.
Be a student of knowledge.